Another 787,000 Americans filed for first-time unemployment benefits the last week before Christmas, which gave us the last snapshot of an appalling 2020 jobs market before the new year, according to the Guardian Business Report. Unemployment rates have been rising again to their highest levels since autumn as the raging coronavirus has slowed hiring and led to more layoffs. At current levels, the weekly claims figures are almost 4 times their pre-pandemic average. Yalanda Tailor is the recruiting partner and owner of CrewedScout.com, a virtual recruiting platform. She also serves as the Human Resources Manager for Central Louisiana Technical College Alexandria campus, and she joined me this week to discuss the impact that the coronavirus has had on the human resources industry as a whole and how we can develop more opportunities for diversity and inclusion for individuals with disabilities. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Yalanda, if you're ready, I'll welcome you to the program, and I'm excited to talk to you about human resources and diversity tonight. So great to see you, and thanks for making a few minutes to talk to me.
Oh, sure. Thanks.
So, Yolanda, when we look at human resources and the pandemic, I'm wondering if I can ask you, as a college recruiter yourself, how do you think the pandemic has affected the way human resources operates around college campuses and just in general as well?
In general, I think it has accelerated, HR technology. Um, One of the concerns I've had being a recruiter for over 12 years is that, some of our processes were a little behind. A lot of companies rely on paper, for filing and so forth and record keeping. And now with the pandemic, it's, forced us to accelerate probably 10 or 20 years ahead of time to be more virtual, and rely less on, being, our physical resources and more on our digital resources. I think in that respect, that's been, a good, benefit for HR and for recruiters, from a recruiting aspect. I think it's been beneficial because it allows you to relate better to people that are technology savvy. As far as those college kids and so forth, they're more into, connecting with people on their phone versus filling out, a paper application or so forth.
It saves the trees, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty beneficial, from a technology aspect.
Taylor says the advancement of technology and the pandemic has actually been a blessing in disguise when we look at incorporating more individuals with disabilities and infusing them into the workforce.
Well, because the pandemic has pretty much, just a year before, we were not, virtual interviews and virtual job fairs were pretty much unheard of. And now fast forward, another year, that's pretty commonplace. Um, I think as long as we keep going that pace, we'll be more inclusive of everybody, you know, that's in the job market. People with different strengths, you know, people with different abilities provide different strengths to the organization. And I think that's one thing we're starting to see now with the pandemic a lot more now, that um, diversity really has made us a whole lot more efficient and a whole lot more productive.
Absolutely, and productive in the sense of uh, looking at HR from a different perspective too. When you
Exactly.
look at incorporating individuals with disabilities as well.
Exactly.
So, you should also say, as an HR director, you're on a quest to help people maximize their fullest potential, and you want them to put their best foot forward. So, can you tell me about that?
Yes, sir. One of the, you know, although I love my job, what made me want to get in my job was because, you know, I think all of us have different strengths and, as you said, different perspectives that we can bring to an organization for us to get a goal, you know, to get our jobs done. And one of the concerns I've had being an HR professional is that, well, prior to the pandemic, you know, our recruiting strategy was very, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Our
I can hear
recruiting
you.
strategy um, excluded a lot of people, you know, just the mere point of having to be at the physical location, for instance, can, you know, exclude people that can't come to the interview. And I wanted to have a more inclusive platform, you know, because, you know, everybody brings something different to the table that can help us reach our goal a lot more efficiently. And my platform, um, in its virtual state, includes a lot more people that, you know, and not only just physically, but, you know, there's some people that have great potential, but they may not shine in an interview. You know, they may have a social anxiety where you can't see that potential. Whereas on my platform, they can pretty much present their best selves at their own pace, or, you know, at a pace that works for them, so that their abilities shine to the recruiter. And so I just want it to be more inclusive and more efficient, and bring us in, you know, and bring recruiting into the correct, you know, into the correct century. I think we had a lot of updating to do prior to the pandemic.
Well, we all have nothing but time on our hands now, so this is the perfect time, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and tell me some about the success stories you've had through your virtual platform.
Oh, sure. One of the success stories I've had was, you know, oftentimes recruiters complain about, you know, how someone may have the perfect resume, but then when you meet the person, they may not live up to the expectations that you thought of them on paper. Well, because of that, you know, my platform allows you to, you know, introduce yourself to employers prior to that first meeting. And so you can not only view their credentials, but you can also view and meet that person. And so that way, by the time y'all do meet face to face, or by the time you decide to make an offer, you pretty much have an idea of who you're hiring and who you're going to be working with. And you don't have to have that, you know, that buyer's remorse, so to speak, or that unpleasant surprise that that person didn't meet the expectations that you thought of when you saw their credentials on paper.
And you're the perfect person to ask this next round of questions, because I wanted to have sort of a rapid fire session with you in terms of when you get a person in an interview, what are the things that aren't on the resume that you look for in terms of character traits when you're looking to hire individuals?
Well, the first thing I look for is, does their experience meet the qualifications? You know what I mean? Um, what I tell people, if you're looking for a job, you want to make it as easy as possible for the person to find you. So if you have those qualifications, you certainly want to make that, you know, prevalent or prominent on the resume. You don't want to hide it. So what I'm looking for is, first of all, do you meet the qualifications? And that needs to be very apparent very quickly to me because we're scanning so many resumes. And at that point, if you meet the qualifications, I'm looking now at, sort of, your work history, your educational, if you meet the educational requirements, just to get a feel of, what type of employee you've been in the past. But make it as easy as possible for someone to hire you by putting your experience, without disguising it in a bunch of fluff or buzzwords. You know what I mean? Just being very clear about what you're responsible for and what you did. And if you come from, I tell like my military veterans, if you come from a background where people may not understand the jargon, you may want to put it in layman's terms, so that, because in reality, you are promoting yourself, and not a lot of people, are aware of that kind of that lingo if they're not familiar with your industry. So you want to make it as easy as possible for people to be able to relate to your experience on your resume.
Absolutely, and I have to tell you from personal experience, I've revamped my resume about 5 to 7 times within the last 2 weeks. So,
Yeah.
just because I think it's also important, and you can speak to this more than I can, but I think it's also important to have a specific resume for a specific job, like tailor your resume towards the qualifications. Would you agree with that?
I would. It's because there's a chronological resume, but there's also, if you've got substantial experience in a position that you've applied for, but it may be a few years down the road, you kind of want to put that up front. You don't want that to be on the second or third page of your resume, because they may not get that far. If you've got that type of experience, but it's been a few years ago, you want people to see that, if not in the resume, especially in the cover letter or the body of the email. So yes, I would agree. You would want to tailor that, because now it looks like you're just mass sending out your resume and you don't really care who you're applying for.
Absolutely. I'm also curious to ask you about cover letters as well. What do you think are the common misconceptions or mistakes that people make when writing a letter? How do you advise them to sort of correct those mistakes?
Um, just remember details. Just consider who your audience is. Your audience is a recruiter that probably don't have a lot of time to spend on just one resume, especially when they've got so many to scan through. So just consider your audience. Make it as plain as possible that you meet the requirements. Get straight to the point. Use bullet points if necessary. Um, and be mindful of your spelling mistakes and your errors, because that's one quick way to get your cover letter glossed over. Just a lot of companies are looking for people that are detail oriented. So if your cover letter is riddled with, you know, grammar errors, they may not even get to your resume. Um, don't make it super, super long. You don't want to bore the person that only has maybe a couple of minutes to look at just your cover letter and resume, which is why I say keep it maybe to 2 or 3 paragraphs max, with some bullet points of maybe your most significant achievements.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, as a journalist, I can appreciate the fact of needing to check the spelling before you submit
Yes,
something. So, um,
yes.
and my final question in terms of job preparedness is, what do you think about once you submit a resume? What are you looking for specifically um, on the resume that makes people stand out?
Um, in addition to the minimum qualifications,
Mm-hmm.
here in the digital world, I would advise people against, putting their physical address on resumes now, because, you're submitting it into cyberspace and you don't know who's looking at, who has access to your address. So I would advise people not to put their physical address on the resume. Um, it just makes it look like you're keeping up, with the digital times. Also, the year of your graduation is not necessarily important. People, um, just to lessen any kind of biases, against your age. Certainly your education is important, but not the year that you graduated. A little bit of creativity, depending on what your industry is. Like if you're applying for something in a creative space, of course, you may want to include some samples of your work or your portfolio with your resume. And it's a really good thing to have like links, like to your LinkedIn page or any business relevant links, like if your Facebook page touts any of your professional accomplishments, having some, LinkedIn or some professional links or your website or anything like that on your resume is always good.
And I don't know if you did any research on me, but I help individuals with disabilities find employment as well. And one of the things I always tell people is be careful on what you post on social media, because
Yes.
recruiters look at that now, right? And that could
Yes.
affect whether or not you get the job. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on the importance of being mindful of what you post on social media.
Exactly. You are very correct in that, because what I tell people is, okay, if you're going to have your LinkedIn page or your Facebook page on your resume, it should be about your industry. And if you want to have, and everybody has a personal life, but if you want to post those types of things, you may want to consider having a separate account that only your friends and family can see and not the world. Those are just some common sense things to keep, recruiters from getting TMI about you. It's always probably a good idea to have a professional, business Facebook page and a page just for your friends and family. Because not only, I'm not so much looking for, what you did over the weekend. I'm looking for things that could be potentially harmful to the people that you work with, like offensive things that could be offensive or racist or, or harassment or bullying. Those kinds of things, we don't certainly want to work with those kind of people or have that in the workplace.
And I have a few more for you. The first is I'm wondering your thoughts also on once someone is hired, how do you sort of monitor their conduct at work? How can people successfully comport themselves, in your opinion, once they're hired?
Well, we normally have like a probationary period. I live in an at-will state, which means that, you can quit, the employee can quit at any time. And the employer can release that employee at any time with or without notice. So I live in an at-will state, which makes it a little easier for us to get rid of problem employees. But also that probationary period, is a working test. And I tell people that before they're hired, that you will have a working test your first few months where we, monitor your conduct and performance, and you'll be coached if necessary. Of course, it's progressive discipline at that point.
And I know for you that you're the parent of a new teenager, so I'm curious to ask you how you're holding up parenting during the age of the pandemic.
Well, I'm loving seeing more of her. She's not so happy seeing so much of me. Um, but I'm loving the time we're having together, but I can't say that the feeling is mutual. Uh,
I'm not surprised you told me that.
yeah, it's not mutual at all. She'd rather be with her friends.
Absolutely. So, what have you learned most about yourself during the pandemic as a parent? I'm just curious.
Um, I am. I'm learning that this is probably the only time we'll get to spend this much with our families and our friends, because when the world opens back up again, we're all going to be too busy. I was at my mom's house in the middle of the week eating a home cooked dinner, and that's not something that you do, just in the middle of the week. That's something that's normally reserved for like a weekend or something, to just visit your family and have a home cooked meal. So I'm cherishing the time that I have with my family, because when the world opens back up again, we'll all be too busy. We always say, oh, I need to go check on that person, and we never find the time to do it. Well, now we've got all the time to do it.
There's nothing but time, absolutely.
Yes.
And my final question for you is, when you're not working, what do you enjoy doing for fun?
Um, Prior to the pandemic here in Louisiana, I consider myself a festival follower. We have lots and lots of festivals here when, the COVID isn't going on. And I'm also a self-proclaimed foodie. I love to eat, but that's no surprise living here in the South. So between the festivals and the food, that's pretty much my hobbies, with, besides spending time with my family. I love to eat. I love festivals. I also like to garden.
I have to follow up then with what's your favorite food to eat there in New Orleans?
Um, Sweets. Sweets is actually an addiction of mine. I've been trying to conquer. Um, Bread pudding with extra sauce. Um, it's probably going to be the death of me.
Oh, I got you. And just finally, if people want to visit or access your virtual recruiting platform, how can they do that?
Just visit www.cruisescout.com. We're all over, Facebook and Instagram. If you have any more questions about your job search that you want some, a professional opinion or just a different perspective on, feel free to send me an email at info@cruisescout.com, and I would love to help. I love to see people, maximizing their potential.
Absolutely. Me and you both. And I want to thank you very much for bringing your expertise and knowledge to the show. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I want to thank you for being here this evening. It's most appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. I actually enjoyed it myself. So if you ever need me again, you know where to find me.